Greetings everyone, I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion. As you can tell from the title up there, it is time for another review, and it is of the late 90s classic Air Force One. Just a little heads up before we get too far into the video, if you do want to support the channel, you can join the Patreon down below. If you do, you get access to perks like being able to see videos early, and you can make requests like this, because this is again a Patreon request from my good buddy John. Always recommending good movies for me for your monthly reviews, John, so keep that up. They're always get me off my butt to go and finally watch it, because as I mentioned before, this is one of the movies that's on the ever-growing list of films I needed to watch. Shrunk by one, but it's grown by a couple things. At press time, my list of films to watch is longer than Chris Jericho's list of 1,004 holds. Of course, if I were to say the whole list, it wouldn't be as funny. Now, this is a film that is directed by Wolfgang Petersen, who is mainly known for two other films, both from the 80s. One, of course, is Enemy Mine, and the other is the film that I just love saying the title of, Das Boot. Of course, before this, he also directed Outbreak, which is another film that's over on the wall somewhere, VHS mode, that I gotta watch one of these days. That one I remember the trailer for, mainly because of the monkey, especially the part of the trailer where the monkey goes to the little girl. Now, he actually does a pretty good job directing, old Peterson does here. Shots are filmed competently, everything's blocked nicely. He did a few more films after this, but just seemed to be his last big film. I mean, I know he did A Perfect Storm a little bit after this, and I forget the name of the last one, I don't have his page up, but every other film afterwards I don't remember being as impactful as this one. But he does do a good job here. The score was conducted by Jerry Goldsmith, legend, sadly no longer with us. Screenplay is by Andrew W. Marlowe, which he followed us up with two big-ish films. He followed us up with End of Days and then did Hollow Man. Other than that, the only thing I note he's done is he wrote the teleplays for 21 episodes of Castle. That's spread throughout the series run, but that's enough to where you could say he almost wrote an entire season's worth of material on his own. He's also one of the creators of the show, so he's left an impact. Of course, the film stars Harrison Ford as the President of the United States. And of course, this is the film where we get that epic one-liner from him, "Get off of my plane!" Gary Oldman playing the villain Igor. And this is the film from which he got the nickname Scary Gary, because during production, while he wouldn't remain in character between takes, he could flip a switch like that. He'd go from his usual, hey, we're doing this, to the moment action was called. It's like just like a flip. He's instantly in character and he's instantly menacing. He used the wrestling phrase of, I can get serious for a moment. And then probably the moment that they called cut, he's back to his normal self. We got Glenn Close in there as the vice president. We got Dean Stockwell as the defense secretary. Elia Baskin as one of Gary Oldman's lackeys. If that name doesn't sound familiar, he's the guy that played Mr. Ditkovich in Spider-Man 2 and 3. So, Mr. Where's My Rent? Of course, I also know him as one of the miners from October Sky. You got Xander Berkeley in there as a Secret Service agent named Gibbs. Kind of a little funny thing there in retrospect. Xander, of course. Deadly Dreams, Candyman, among other stuff. Of course, also one of the step-parents in Terminator 2. We got German Prochnow in there in a small role as General Ivan Reddick, who kind of sets the plot in motion, his captivity. His casting is interesting considering he played the captain in Das Boot. We got Willard Pugh in there as a White House communications officer. If that name doesn't sound familiar, you might recognize him as Mayor Cusack from RoboCop 2. T-dialed! And that was one of those ones I was looking at. I'm like, wait a minute, is that who I think it is? Oh, it is him! And there's a couple more on here that I wrote down. You got William H. Macy in there as a Air Force major. That's all the major people. But we also got Wendy Crewson playing the First Lady. I didn't write down the name of the actress who plays her daughter, but she was in A Little Princess previously, which I do have that film over there. That'll be an interesting film to revisit and review. One of these days I gotta make my way through all those ones I watched as a kid, maybe do a whole childhood favorites month. That'd be interesting. Now, the plot of the film is that the president has just made a speech in Russia following a joint mission between American forces and Russian forces involved in the Middle East. So still a little topical, even though this film was made before the War on Terror, but how oddly it still has to be a little topical, even if that's more in retrospect. Well, him and his family and everyone that went overseas with him are getting onto Air Force One when the plane is infiltrated by terrorists who take it over to try to get the Russian government to release a imprisoned general. And if they don't, people are going to start dying. So if you want to look at it in a base form, Air Force One falls into that category of films that were made in the wake of Die Hard, where you take an enclosed area, have it taken over by terrorists, and have one lone person who doesn't get captured try to save everybody. And he ends up face to face with the bad guy in the end, says a couple one-liners, and the guy ends up dying somehow. And of course, you got the bad guy played by an excellent actor, and the guy that plays our hero is a very credible action guy. I mean, it's Harrison Ford. It's Han Solo and Indiana Jones himself, so of course he's going to be credible in that role, even if he's playing a president that hasn't really done a lot of the action-y stuff in years. So in that case, Harrison Ford being a little older at this point, but not too old. Like, he's not just restricted to playing mentor characters like he more is now. This is where he's like, I think he was in his 50s at this point, but he was aging pretty well, so it's like some actors from the Hitchcock era where they were playing characters younger than them or acting like characters younger than them. The audience might notice a little bit of their age, but because of how the actor was aging, is a little bit more credible. And of course, you'd say in certain regards, Harrison Ford's going to, because of his past, is going to be a little bit more believable doing this type of film than, say, like Jimmy Stewart would. Though with Jimmy Stewart, you'd probably have to write some of that tongue-in-cheek stuff in there to get a good reason for why he's doing it. I don't know why I'm punching this guy, but get off of my plane! Now, while Wolfgang does not have any regrets about making this film, he did say on the commentary track that he probably would not have made it in a post-9/11 world, and that's mainly because he didn't feel that the film would have been as well received and it would have done as well in the post-9/11 world. Because critics did love the film. I mean, just look at what it says on the front of the VHS. Breathtaking, gripping, nail-biting, edge-of-your-seat entertainment, which is from Peter Travers of the Rolling Stone. And then Janet Maslin of the New York Times says a fast-paced, red-blooded action movie, which is true. And it was made for $85 million in '97 money, which is, when rolled for inflation, is $147.6 million today. And it made $315 million, which is $547 million today. That's rounding to the nearest dollar, by the way, unless I put a point. Now, in a post-9/11 world, it's true it might not have done as well, but that's going to depend on when. Like, if you were to have made it and released it, like, right after the incident? Yeah. Maybe a year or two afterwards? Maybe not, especially with how triumphant this film comes across, especially with Jerry Goldsmith's theme. Something like that, especially with some of the lines, like, get off of my plane, and punching a terrorist right off his plane. I think in an instance like that, it would have done just as well. You would have had to make some concessions in how the film was arranged in a post-9/11 world, but I think it still would have done just as well. It's just that probably as a director, Peterson would have made different choices. But that's also just him probably being his own worst critic. Artists usually are their own worst critics. I mean, mine mainly comes from how I edit stuff together. I'm like, okay, could it have been a little tighter there, could have been a little tighter there. So there's that. Now, funny little thing is that while making it, Peterson was also initially denied access to the real Air Force One, but a call from Harrison Ford changed that. No president's going to say no to Captain Solo. Jerry Goldsmith, like I said, excellent score. He was not the original choice for composer, though. That honor went to Randy Newman. He was hired and he composed it, but Peterson felt his score was a little too serious. How IMDb words it, it was serious to the point of being unintentionally funny. Which, considering how over-the-top, bombastic, and triumphant Jerry Goldsmith's score is, it makes me wonder just how much that was. I know this score complements the film and how stuff is paced, so it makes me wonder, was it super serious? Would it have come across as one of those TV dramas and maybe clashed a bit? And probably got chuckles where there weren't supposed to be ones. So they put Newman's score on ice, and they hired Goldsmith, and he had to compose this score in about 12 days. And considering how great it is, that's a testament to Goldsmith as a composer. Newman would eventually use some of his score in Toy Story 3. I'm guessing that was for the super serious moments, like the ending part in the furnace. Now, before Harrison Ford took up the mantle of President Marshall, there were other actors who were considered. Kevin Costner, but he was busy filming The Postman, which is a film I gotta watch one of these days. Tom Hanks, John Malkovich, Tommy Lee Jones, Dennis Quaid, Keanu Reeves, which those would have been interesting candidates. Of course, you'd have to modify it just a little bit. Tom Hanks, you'd have to really play up the fish out of water aspect with him. I gotta punch that guy! John Malkovich this time definitely would have worked. Tommy Lee Jones, this is of course post-Oscar win from The Fugitive, film he did with Harrison Ford. And then of course it's follow-up. So it would have been a little believable. Dennis Quaid, definitely. Keanu Reeves, of course, this was during, I think this was after his first wave of action movies. I think this might have been when he was starting to do more serious and comedy stuff, before he started doing action movies again. I don't have his thing up, so I'm just going based off memory with that, but he would have been believable in that one. And of course, Ford did go before the MPAA with this film to try to get a PG-13 rating, but unlike Clear and Present Danger, it didn't work. Which that's another reason why Ford works in the role in this film, is the Jack Ryan films. Of course, this is also when Ford was in that little era of doing his own other bit of action-y films in the wake of Indiana Jones. I mean, both of the Jack Ryan films, 6 Days, 7 Nights is the name of the film. That's kind of an action-y, romantic one. And of course, Ford and Gary Oldman, they do have a pretty decent chemistry for a little bit there together, but they really only share one scene, and that's, well, it's one elongated scene, and that's after Ford is captured near the end, and then he's brought before Oldman's character, and they have their little interaction. So unlike Die Hard, which is where they're taking inspiration from, with the basic genesis of this plot idea, they don't meet before the climax, which in that film would have been a mistake. Here, I can kind of see why, because unlike a building where you got a lot of room, on a plane, you got a little bit less justification for why the protagonist and antagonist would meet before the climactic scene unless they know each other. And with their little bit of chemistry, they're mainly striving from the fact that one character is the president of the United States, most powerful man in the free world, as it were, and the other is a terrorist that basically is going to start offing people unless his demands are met. And there's the whole United States shtick of, we don't negotiate with terrorists. Because of that chemistry there, it's no wonder Ford named him his favorite on-screen nemesis, which, considering all the people Ford has fought on-screen ever since Star Wars in '77, that's a lot of people. Now, I don't know when he made that comment, so it might be one that might need an amendment, but considering how great Gary Oldman is at playing characters, good guys, bad guys, middle, I wouldn't put it past that phrase to still be intact. Especially since this is around the same time he played one of my favorite movie bad guys in The Fifth Element. This character here is a little bit more over the top than that guy, but in a different way. And of course his Russian accent goes without saying. Now Glenn Close, she does a pretty good job playing the vice president. She was a last-minute casting decision. I'm starting to sense a pattern in certain regards with elements like that. And because of that, since she had a short haircut at the time, she wore a wig from her collection. And without having read that, I would not have known that was a wig. That's a pretty good wig job, and it's lit and filmed pretty well, so you don't notice. Now, she only really had one story objection with how her character was written in the script, and that is when she's on the phone with the terrorists, or right after, her character is supposed to break down. And this is what she said about it. I will not do that, because I thought what we were going to do was a disfavor to women if we had that cliche moment. Which I know some people are going to go, oh man, here comes that feminist stuff. This is an instance where something like that, you get it, and it's understandable. Because if you put in that type of moment, it kind of undermines the character. You could do it in a more subtle way without it undermining. Like when she's on the phone and the one character gets shot, you can see she does cry a little bit and she does react like, oh my god. That's a little bit more believable, especially for a character that's in the position of power that she's in. It's one of those things, to use the wrestling terminology, you don't sell it. You might feel it inside, but it's better to imply it than to actually show it. We know what the character's thinking. We don't have to actually have it seen and have it undermine how the character is written and presented otherwise. Dean Stockwell does a pretty good job as the defense secretary. And of the White House people, he's really the only one you don't like, and that's mainly because with everything going on, he's trying a power play. Mainly because he sees the president is compromised with everything. Which apparently this is a little bit of political commentary from something from the Reagan administration involving a little power play while Reagan was incapacitated, and they're trying to figure out, okay, which one of us, according to the Constitution, is going to be the one who's in charge while he's like that. And because of that, and the fact that the person who was in the wrong position tried to take power, and the negative press resulting from that he had to resign, they just... it's one of those weird little things. Well, they threw it in there. Now, I'd already seen that at IMDb, that something like that was in there, so when it was playing out on screen, it didn't really surprise me. But I can just imagine someone watching this film for the first time without that knowledge is watching some of these scenes with Stockwell and other characters and like, what the heck is he doing? Why is he bringing up the Constitution? Why is he doing that? Really? He's going to do a power play like this? Let's just say after the events of the film, I wouldn't be surprised if Defense Secretary Walter Dean soon found himself in the unemployment line. Okay, Baskin as Andre does a pretty good job. Nice little second-in-command character there. He's really the only one of the Russian characters with Oldman that really gets any type of little development, but it's not really a lot. The rest of them are basically just Russian terrorists that are supposed to stand there and look menacing. Xander Berkeley. Now, I already knew what his plot twist was from looking up info on IMDb before that happened in the film, but even then, with how his character is shot, you can definitely tell there's something going on with him, and I know this is going to be a little bit of a spoiler for those of you who were like me until a couple hours ago and haven't seen the film, but spoiler alert, unless you want to skip over this part of the film, I'm giving you this little thing right here. This is your chance to stop it. Alright, you have a pause if you don't want it spoiled. If you don't, too bad. Here we go. Xander Berkeley's character is the terrorist's inside man. Adds a little bit more context to how the heck they were able to get on the plane and take it over. And it adds a little bit of gray area to that character. Now, his motivation for why he does it is never talked about, but you can just guess, like, he probably did it for the money, he probably did it because he doesn't like what the government's doing. But in an older script and in the novelization, they did give an answer. Now, according to Peterson's commentary, the older scripts explained that he was a CIA agent that lost a lot in the Cold War, and he was angry and disillusioned with the U.S. government, and he knew the terrorists from his days in the CIA, so he decided, you know what, I'm tired of all this, I'm tired of what the government's doing, so I'm just going to aid these guys. And the novelization added the fact that he was a Russian sleeper agent, and of course it was all cut for pacing. I actually like both of them. I think it's interesting if both are true, that he was in the CIA during the Cold War, he became disenfranchised with it, and then the Russians reached out to him and he knew them from that, so he became a sleeper agent, and he happened to know the terrorists, so it's kind of like he's playing the long con, and then he went from there. Cutting it for pacing loses some of the nuance, but it's one of those ones that, thinking about it with how the film is shot and how his character scenes are framed and everything and the build up to it, because there is a good amount of foreshadowing in with how his character is filmed, especially near the end when he pulls the gun out of the one body. That's where you kind of get, what's he doing that for? We don't need to be pulling guns. And then at the end you're like, ah. Now, before they cast Xander, Scott Glenn was considered for the role, which with how they cut the character down, that would have been a waste of Glenn's talent, but it would have been interesting if they had done with the original one. I can imagine them giving him a line near the end, like, why? And say something like, you already know why. You already know why, Mr. President. Jurgen Prochnow doesn't really have a lot to do, so his is a glorified cameo. That's an example of probably how Glenn would have been in the final film if they had kept that in, but is what it is. Only other bit of trivia that I found was interesting was that then President Bill Clinton saw the film and he loved it while he was in office. The only thing he had to say was, I'm not going to do a Clinton impression, by the way, just so you know, I don't really do one. is that he pointed out that the real Air Force One didn't have a parachute ramp or an escape pod. And of course, in response, Peterson said that future models of Air Force One probably would incorporate them. All right. The action scenes are filmed pretty well. You do see what's going on in the sound design form. You really hear the gunshots. The special effects, they're pretty good. The only shot that I didn't really like that much was the end when Air Force One crashes. Spoiler alert. That's when the 97 effects really do start to not age as well, because this is when they started to incorporate a lot more CG into the special effects, into the model work, which when they're blended right, they age well. Like, look at the special effects in Lord of the Rings. Now, there are moments with the CGI you can kind of tell, but for the most part, the blending works pretty well. The models and the CGI enhancements, it's kind of what dates the Hobbit films a bit more in retrospect, but that's a different trilogy. Here, that crash, it really was a little dated. Other than that, it fit pretty well, a lot of the stuff. And overall, it is a very entertaining film. Now, I don't have the whole list of films that were inspired by Die Hard right in front of me, but this is definitely near the top, and it's one of the last ones I made like that, because there's only so many places you could take that type of idea and have it work. I mean, you have Die Hard in itself takes place in a building. Here, it's Die Hard on a plane, and you can do Die Hard on a train. That's a little bit harder. Unless you do it like Die Hard on the subway. Speed, kind of Die Hard on a bus, so there's that one. There's only so many ideas you could do. I mean, you could have done Die Hard on a cruise ship, but then Speed 2 came along and made that bad. But you could always do it in a better way. But there's only so many ways you could do an idea like that. I mean, even look what the Die Hard sequels, they had to kind of change it just a little bit in order to keep it fresh to a point. But all in all, Air Force One, definitely an excellent film. Definitely a film that screams of the mid to late 90s, despite what I said earlier about if it had been made when. Actors all do a pretty good job. Now, some are written more deeply than others, but this is not one of those films where you're looking for super, super deep character development. It's an action film, but it does have some more depth than like the typical one. But that's mainly because it's a political one. So there's going to be a little bit of that, but it's not going to sit there and grandstand to you. I mean, there's a little bit of that because we see some of the characters in DC doing their political movements, showing some of their machinations. I mean, like I mentioned about Stockwell's character earlier. But you don't feel like when you're watching it like, come on, more. You don't feel like that, so that's good. It does come with the Mar stamp of approval if you haven't seen it. Definitely look forward to watching it a couple more times, see if there's anything about the stuff I missed. And if there's one thing I will say about it that I haven't said already, is that Harrison Ford does play a good father character. Till next time, guys.